Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to Let's Talk Destiny and the A Mother's Cry podcast. I'm excited to be back tonight, blessed and honored to be able to share with you once again. As I said, been saying for the last couple of weeks or so, if you have a loved one who is incarcerated, you really need to be listening in on this conversation tonight. I'm honored to have two very special ladies with me. First, I'll start with the one and only Aaliyah Williamson. She is my partner in the greatest support system that God could have sent me for a mother's cry and the work that we've been assigned to do. And I'm just so blessed to have her in my life. So, Aaliyah, say good evening to the people.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jamesina. I'm happy to be here and offer support for all of our communities. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then I am so blessed to have on my humble platform the one and only Professor Olinda Moyd. Um, Professor Moyd is a distinguished professor in residence and director of the Reentry Clinic. She was previously an adjunct professor and supervising attorney for the Reentry Clinic at the Howard University School of Law. Prior to joining the Howard Law faculty, Professor Moyd was chief attorney of the parole division at the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia, where she was employed for 3 decades. I am physically unable to read Dr. Professor Moore's entire bio tonight. My throat is really like messed up. But I want every person who does any work or you have any interest at all in serving those who are incarcerated and preparing to re-enter into our society, I want you to Google Professor Moyd and read her bio in its entirety. She is not just someone who's talking the talk, but she is also walking the walk. And I love that she is actively involved in our communities. She's not sitting on the outside of our communities, yelling across the street at us, telling us what we should be doing. But she's actively involved in our communities. She currently serves on several boards, including the DC Council for Court Excellence, the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform, and Panacea, I hope I said that right, Media Humanized, which is a media format to build spaces for constructive dialogue to showcase human solutions. The thing that has drawn me to Professor Moyd, well, a lot of things drew me to Professor Moyd, but her areas of specialization are clinical legal education, um, parole representation, post conviction, prisoners' rights, and reentry reform. And the thing is, like, we hear a lot of talk about reentry these days. Like, that's kind of like the buzzword in our community. But to actually have someone who has years and years, decades of service in this area and teaches us, and we can learn so much from her tonight, to be able to take time to come and sit with us. I am deeply humbled, honored to have Professor Boyd with us tonight. Welcome to the platform.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me this evening. Um, I appreciate all of that, but I really am just a servant of the people. Um, Before you got on the call, Miss Aaliyah and I were talking about like kind of the work that I do, and this is my calling. This is my ministry. Um, I will certainly share about my background, but a lot of attorneys go into practicing law for various reasons. A lot of people go into criminal defense work for the sexy side of doing trial work and having that Perry Mason moment in the courtroom, catching somebody in a lie, cross examination, and all of that is fun. But the reality is that 90% of the cases, criminal cases, the individuals don't go to trial. They take a plea. And then the question becomes what happens with those individuals who wind up behind our prison walls? And so, for decades, my work has been doing prisoners' rights work, and that's where I started with the NAACP and the ACLU National Prison Project, just doing prisoners' rights work, and also just doing parole work, trying to get people out of prison. And so, long before the term decarceration became popular, I was doing my work in two ways, right? Like when I was with the ACLU and the NAACP, we did the class action lawsuit. So we were filing on behalf of several individuals and trying to make conditions better and trying to close down prisons, but also doing the individual work, meeting people where they are, going in and doing individual representation, whether it's parole or post conviction, to get people out of prison. Um, we in America, we have to confront the reality. The reality is we are in a crisis of mass incarceration, and most of the people who are behind our prison walls are people of color. In the state of Maryland, we make up somewhere around 30% of the general population, but more than 72% of the individuals behind bars are people of color. And so we are in a crisis. And it's important for us to address that, to recognize that, and to figure out what we as a society, what are we doing? What are we doing with people who are behind bars for decades? And I will stop there and let you ask questions.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. It kind of answered my first question, which was what inspired you to dedicate your work to reentry law, and to serving those behind the wall. So, I mean, you answered exactly what I needed to know. Um, could you describe, and I'm going to ask you a question and then I'm going to allow Aaliyah to ask you some questions as well. But could you describe for us your experiences in the reentry clinic? What exactly is involved in that work?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So, the clinic at American University, I'll just give you the history. It started in 2019. Professor Margaret Berry is the professor who started the clinic. And when she started the clinic, they focused on parole representation. So, they were representing people at parole hearings, most who had been in serving decades long sentences. So we again need to address the reality that we have been sentencing thousands of people of color behind bars for decades. Excessive sentences have been just doled out like haphazardly. So we have a lot of people who have spent time behind bars. Most of the people that we represent in the parole context and now in the juvenile lifer context are people who have been in prison longer than my students have been born. Most of them have been in for 30, 40, some even 50 years. And so we realize that getting people out of prison is not
Mm.
just, it's certainly very important, but for people who've been in prison for that long, so much has changed, right, since they were initially sentenced. Sometimes family members have passed away. Supporters who were there at the beginning might not be there when they're actually released. And so we recognize that there has to be, again, especially for people who have served decades in prison, there has to be a reentry plan. We can't just
Yeah.
release people from prison without any kind of support. And even individuals who have a family to go back to, that family has changed and they might also need support. And so we make sure that every person that we represent, when they are released, they are connected with a reentry service provider. We make sure that they are connected with a reentry service provider who can provide holistic wraparound services. And that includes housing if necessary, transportation if necessary, doing the basics like getting people an identification. Like, just imagine being released from prison and not having an identification. So you can't even open a bank account. You can't even get a job. You can't even get a driver's license. So making sure that people are set up to receive those basic services is what reentry looks like. And it should be a smooth transition because there are responsibilities on the part of the Department of Corrections, but they often fail short. And we still have people, men and women, who are coming out without identification, without the proper documentation. And I will just share one story of a client who got released under the Juvenile Restoration Act. He was a juvenile lifer, had been in for 32 years, and he got released, and his friend invited him to go to the grocery store with him. Well, grocery stores have changed a lot since he was 15 when he went in.
Right.
And he said it
Mm.
was just very overwhelming. And his friend told him, just pick up what you want, put it in the cart. I'll meet you here in the aisle, and we'll pay for it together. And he said he just froze in the middle of the grocery store because,
Wow.
again, the world has changed so much. And so the reentry piece is just really, really critical.
Absolutely. Wow, I love that. Before Aaliyah asks you some questions and make some comments, I'd like to remind those who are watching to feel free to like this video and share it. And if you have any questions for Professor Moy, feel free to put them in the comments section, and I will make sure that she sees those. All right, Aaliyah? I think she's having trouble
Can you
hearing
hear
you.
me
Can
okay?
you
Because
hear
I'm
me?
having instability with my Wi-Fi. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
You hear me now? Yeah. For some reason, my Wi-Fi wants to act up right at this moment, so just bear with me, and then I'll put my questions in the chat as well, going in and out. Um, so my first question is just to the point of what you stated regarding reentry and the fact of socializing society to those who have been incarcerated for so long, with the gentleman who was just trying to go to the grocery store, those type of situations that create a level of anxiety that many of us don't understand. And how do you believe that we can shift the public perception that reentry is currently seen as a public safety concern, um, as opposed to the fact that and it actually will add to economic development?
That's an excellent question. And I will start with just looking at the void that we see in many of our communities. The reality is, Black men are missing. The Black family structure has been torn apart, it has been severed. Um, Black women, Black mothers are missing in many cases. And so, especially when you look at the fact that there are certain zip codes where, when you look at the prison population, many of our men and women come from. those neighborhoods are missing mothers, fathers, brothers, uncles. They're missing that family structure. And so when a person has so I could talk a lot about what the purpose of incarceration is, right? Is it retribution? Is it to punish people? Is it to hold people accountable? Is it rehabilitation? I believe that
I definitely was going to ask that question.
I believe
Hmm.
that when a person has gotten to the point where they can demonstrate that they have been rehabilitated, why are we continuing to hold them in prison?
Mm,
If the parole board or the courts, they have a series of factors that they have to examine before a person is released. And one of those factors is always, does the person pose a danger to the community? And if the answer to that question is no, I believe that people can be returned to their communities and to their families safely. So the question you asked is, what can we do? I think we need to change the way we think about returning citizens, right? And so I'm a person of faith. I grew up
mm,
in the Baptist church, spent years in church, and still there are people who sit in pews every Sunday and are afraid to share with their fellow congregants that they have a son or a daughter in prison because of the
mm,
stigma that's attached. So we have to change the stigma, we have to change the narrative, and we need to make sure that we are in the business of welcoming our brothers and sisters back home after they have been returned to us. That also means getting rid of some of the legal barriers, right? Because there are so many collateral consequences that come with having a criminal record. In the District of Columbia, one of the conditions is you can't associate with other known felons. So that means that if there are two people in the household that are on supervision, in some cases, one of them has to find somewhere else to live. And so you go to the shelter at Second and D in DC, and you see folks are there because that's their only option. Housing, right?
mm,
Employment barriers, occupational licensing. We have people who are in prison who spend decades cutting hair, being a barber, and they come out, they cannot get an occupational license to be a barber. So there are many barriers to returning to our communities that need to be addressed, and we need some policy changes. And so that's why, as a part of the work that I do with the clinic, we don't just work to get people released either through parole or court hearings. We don't just work to connect people with reentry service providers. One of the pieces of the clinic that I added on to my curriculum is to do legislative work. And so my students and I, we go to the DC Council, we go to Annapolis, and we testify regarding various bills. And so I believe that we've got to attack it on all fronts.
mm. Agreed. And
You know,
do you think that reentry would be more
Yes,
productive? Can you
yes.
hear me? Can
I
you
don't
hear
know if you
me?
can hear me, but yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Do you think that reentry would be more productive themselves had pre reentry programs, because how are we quantifying rehabilitation? Because if rehabilitation incorporate
Hmm.
whether they're prepared to enter into
Hmm.
reentry, how do you know that that transition can actually take place? Because if we want to quantitate, do you think that that connection would help in terms of the institution is preparing them for reentry, to then place them back into society, because of that we don't want you here for the rest of your life. This is a part of training you in terms of changes you need to make. And when you talk about from a biblical perspective, and we talk about being in a jubilee year, this is where restoration truly takes place. But we have to give people the resources for restoration, and it needs to start while they're incarcerated. Because how are they actually, again, what is the basis for rehabilitation when you're in, you know, in conditions where you're not being prepared, you're not being given hope, and you don't really have resources to.
Okay, I think she's having
Yeah,
trouble with her
yeah.
Wi-Fi. You're frozen. Yeah. Well, while she's getting back to us, let me ask you. I was thinking as you were talking about the legislation, and there's so many things that hinder
Hmm.
us. And my personal situation, what's going on with my son and everything, and pretty much everybody in the world knows now because I'm telling people in the grocery store, everybody I see, I'm just telling everybody. But the situation is, and um, I try to keep myself, I try to keep the mother separated from the advocate, but it's like really hard, almost impossible to do that. Because the passion that I have for advocacy comes
Sure.
from my experience as a mother.
Sure.
And so when you were talking about the rehabilitation, I remember many years ago, I was studying, I was an intern at a local detention center here in my hometown. And I was, doing some social work kind of stuff. And I asked the warden, I said, can I ask you a question? I said, do you see these facilities, the reason for them being punishment or rehabilitation? Without even taking a breath, he said to me, oh, definitely punishment.
Hmm.
I could care less about people being rehabilitated.
Hmm.
So I said to him, well, that's why you have such a high level of recidivism.
Yes.
Again, without taking a breath, he says, ma'am, I call that job security.
Yes.
And so I walked away from that encounter, realizing he is not the only person in authority that feels that
Hmm.
way. So you have a situation such as with my son, and there's thousands of people in the same situation, but they've done everything that they were told they should do with regard to getting parole, without regard to getting home. Um, you live in that environment. I don't know how he's able to be there almost 19 years and only have one violation. I couldn't do it myself. But um, the response is, yes, we know he's low risk. He had everything lined up that he needed to have lined up as far as work and a place to live and all that. But because of Maryland's ridiculous mandatory minimum laws, no matter how good a job he's done, no matter how great his institutional record is, he cannot even come up for parole again until that minimum amount of time. I cannot even imagine how that impacts a person's mind, body, and spirit to live in that environment day in and day out and doing everything you can to stay out of
Yeah.
trouble, to stay on the right path and be told, well, that's wonderful. We're glad you did that. You seem to have been rehabilitated, but we're still not going to let you go.
Yeah.
Do you have people, have you had cases like that where you felt like the person should have been allowed to be re-entered into society, but the laws would not allow them to be?
Absolutely, absolutely. We take on a lot of cases in my clinic. I will say that my passion for helping people is greater than my capacity. Um, so we certainly can't
Yeah.
take on every case, but yes, we've had cases that we've taken on that we knew were challenges. Um, and so they didn't turn out the way that we hoped they would. And all we can do in those cases is continue to bring hope into dark spaces. That's all we can do, right? Um, in response to, you said the warden said to you that people are definitely sent to prison for punishment. Actually, the sentence is the punishment. They are
Mm.
not to be punished while they are there, but the sentence itself is punishment. Um, and I think Aaliyah's question had to do with the responsibility on the Department of Corrections to prepare people for release and prepare people for the opportunity to return to their families. Well, in most states, each Department of Corrections, whatever it's called, public safety corrections, they, in most cases, they have like a reentry person, a reentry coordinator, or whatever the title is. Um, that doesn't always trickle down to what reentry looks like in every institution. The experts say that
Mm.
reentry should start on the day that you walk into the prison door. On the day that you walk into the prison door, someone should be working with you to devise a plan that if you do this, 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 and this, if you don't have your GED, get your GED. If you
Mhm.
have
Yes.
a GED, take some college courses. If you
Mhm.
have an anger management issue, take some programming, or domestic violence, or whatever the issue is. If you have a mental health issue, that should certainly be addressed. When you walk into the prison door, you should have a plan that walks you
Yes.
towards leaving. That,
Mhm.
unfortunately,
I agree with
is
that.
a failure on so many
That's
systems.
what's missing.
As often yeah, that's what's missing. As
Mhm.
often as the experts say, this is what motivates people to do the right thing while they're in, and it sets them up for success when they are released. There's still often, unfortunately, many
Wow.
failures.
And they want to add value when they are released
Oh,
to their
goodness gracious.
families. They don't want to be a burden, which they become because they don't have
Yes,
any resources, education, they don't have a
yes,
trade. This is where partnership with businesses needs to come in, full
yes,
pipeline of full-time
yes,
employees who are prepared to
yeah,
work on demand as they are released from prison.
yes. And there are some
I love that. I
there are
love that.
some jurisdictions that certainly are making greater strides towards making sure that businesses are hiring people with a criminal record, and that you don't always just automatically get turned down because you have to fill out that box that says, do you have a conviction? DC is one of them, the Council for Court
Well, business owners
Excellence.
don't trust the process.
They don't trust the process.
I'm sorry.
They,
I was just mhm,
yes, you're right.
correct.
They don't trust the process
They
because
don't they
there's
don't trust
no,
the intention or the process because they're not
that's right.
preparing them to walk
That's right.
out to be good citizens.
That's
So
right.
why should they take them?
Right. Yeah. And in Maryland, we have the MCE Enterprises, Maryland Correctional Enterprises. They make license plates, they make all of the furniture for the institution, which is great. But is that going to lead to a marketable job when you get out? And what support can you get from the people that you've been doing it for decades to hire you,
Right.
when you get released?
Exactly. Like, where am I going to go after I get out so I can make some license plates? Like,
Right.
seriously, where is that
Motor
And
place?
vehicle
Jamie, this
doesn't
is what
do
we
it
talked
because they
about
rely on the
before.
institutions.
Yeah, and Jamie and I talked about this before.
I'm
We
sorry,
have
Leah.
some states like Alabama who are using it as free labor to take advantage of those incarcerated as opposed to using it as a partnership for hiring them during the reentry process and ensuring that they're educated while they're in prison. Out, they've already invested in them, so they would want to hire
Yeah.
them. This
Yes.
is where I things just kind of fall off the train tracks there.
Yes. And if you talk about what is the purpose of incarceration, let's look at the origin of incarceration, right? So before the Civil War, all of our prisons were filled with white people, poor whites. After the Civil War, as soon as slavery was abolished, the color of our prisons in this country changed from white to black. So
Mm,
our incarceration crises is an extension of slavery, Jim Crow. That's what we have now, mass incarceration. So let's,
mhm,
Oh my God, I'm glad you mentioned that because this is a conversation. These are the kind of conversations I have with my son, right? He is like one of the most intelligent men that I know. And I'm not just saying it because he's mine, because, if he was dumb as a box of rocks, I would just not say anything. But he is extremely intelligent and he remembers dates. like, like if you have a conversation with him, he can say in 1820 something this happened, that happened, and this. He's like really smart, and we talk about the or origin of
yeah,
incarceration and how it turned into become a prison industrial complex
yes,
situation because when slavery ended, they said we've got to find a way to keep making money. So how about we just lock up
mhm,
all these darkies
yes,
and use
mhm,
them as property and we can still make money off
yes,
of
yes. And even when our prison population
it.
started to decrease, that's when we started seeing things like the war on drugs, right? The war on crime, which
mhm,
was really a
mhm.
war against our
Yep.
people. The
Yes.
rhetoric from the 1980s about super
Mhm,
predators. And I would
Yes.
say, look at where we are now, right? So even though in some states the populations are going down, what are we seeing increase right now? Detaining immigrants. And so
Immigrants, that's
those,
right.
I saw a piece on the news a few weeks ago where a sheriff in like Arizona was taking the reporters on a tour of his facility because he's got so many empty beds. And he was welcoming the federal government to send the detainees to his prison. So
Wow.
we're going
That's
to
crazy.
start seeing a lot more of that.
Wow. Well, I'm going to say this, and I know Leah has more to say, but many of us, many people that I've talked to, I was talking about in preparation for our conversation tonight, they're not even aware that there are clinics such as the one where you share and teach. This kind of like you just, when you're dealing with this whole mass incarceration crisis, it just like you feel like you're out on a ship somewhere by yourself in the middle of the
Yeah.
ocean, and nobody is going through what you're going through. Nobody's hearing what you're saying. You're not using proper language. That's one of the reasons why I thank God for bringing Aaliyah in my life, because when I first connected with her, I was always coming from the mother of an incarcerated person. This is disgusting. This is what's going on in these prisons. My child, I don't care whether he's innocent or guilty, he's a human being. And da 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 da. And so Aaliyah would like, okay, let me get it out. And then she would give me the verbiage that would properly get my message across without it sounding like, I was becoming a terrorist or something. But the point is, but what the point that I'm trying to make right this moment is, can you talk to us a little bit about more about these law clinics, why they're important, why as we're looking ahead, and even right now, how do you see the role of these clinical legal educations being necessary and evolving to help us in this criminal justice battle?
Okay, so a few things. One is um, when folks are in law school, most of what they learn is through textbooks. I have always believed that the best learning comes from doing. And so that's why I have been committed to teaching in a clinical setting, and so that my students can learn by doing, that they can put into practice. Most of the students in my class are in their third year, their last year of law school. And so they've spent the last 2.5 years just learning from the textbook. When they come to my clinic, they get an opportunity to practice under my bar card before they actually go into the world and start representing people. So think about this. Would you want to go to a hospital and need surgery, and the doctor who is going to perform the surgery has never worked as a resident before? You would want the doctor to have
No.
practiced under someone's leadership before they operate on you. And so that's what clinical
That's
teaching
right.
is. It is an opportunity for students to be able to practice before they go into the world and actually start practicing on their own. I also believe that it's important, not sure if you're familiar with the term called movement lawyering, but movement
No,
lawyering
ma'am.
is a concept that has recently emerged from the activities that we have seen in the community with the shooting of Black individuals, men and women, with the treatment of the immigrants in our communities. And
Mm-hmm.
movement lawyering should be based on lawyers being in the community. So we could sit in our law firms, in our law schools, and our ivory towers and theorize about what should be. Or we can be in the community with the people, lending our voice, not sucking up all the air in the room as if we have the most to offer, but lending our voice to the
Yes.
community when needed. And that to me is what movement lawyering is. Um, the first time that I retired, and I laugh because my husband says I failed at retirement. But the first time that I retired, the Saturday after I
You weren't done yet.
retired,
You
I'm
weren't
not,
done
and
yet.
I'm still not done. Still not
And
done.
God's not
Um,
done with you. So you keep
that's
going.
right. I went into, I knew that I wanted to continue to do this work. Wasn't sure what it was going to look like, but I knew that I wanted to be connected greater to community organizations. I went to a Saturday workshop of an organization called Life After Release, led by a
Mm.
formerly incarcerated woman, Kiana Johnson, who does amazing work in Prince George's County. And we worked together on a case of an individual whose aunt kept coming to the meetings over and over and saying, "My nephew needs some help. My nephew needs some help." Working on that case with that organization, grassroots organization, was an amazing experience. It was what community based lawyering is all about, because we all brought something to the
Mm.
table. We all brought our skills, our passions, and that's how we were able to be successful in the case. And again, that's what movement lawyering is: making space for the community to be involved, the community to show up, um, and the community to have the opportunity to support individuals as we work towards release. One of the greatest things that I just love doing when I represent individuals is having a presence in the courtroom that shows the community that they come from. So again, most of the
Right.
people that we represent are people who've been in prison for decades, and most of them took a plea.
Mhm.
So they really never had the opportunity to ever tell their story in a courtroom. So for some of the people
Right.
we are representing, this is the first time after decades in prison that they are able to tell their story before a parole board or before the courts. And so we like to bring into the
Wow.
courtroom people that represent the various stages of their lives. And so, yes, sometimes that's family members, that's people who knew them as children. We had one case where a social worker who worked with my client when he was 9 years old heard about the
Mm.
hearing and showed up in the courtroom. She hadn't seen him for decades.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
It also means bringing in people who have been in prison with our clients, right? Because they do form a community and they are like family. And when you bring those success stories of people who've been released, who are doing amazing things in the community, when you bring them into the courtroom, the judge sees them, right? And think about it, the judge
Yes.
typically
Yes.
sees who? They see the people who screw up, the people who are being violated, the people who've gotten released and got to
Mhm.
go back to court
Mhm.
for one reason or another. They rarely get to see the success stories. And so we always bring those success stories into the courtroom for the judge to see.
Wow, that's powerful. Now, we're going to shift in a few minutes. Aaliyah is going to bring up something else that we wanted to talk to you about tonight. But for those of you who are wondering, because I know how some of you all minds work, yes, I have already talked to Professor Moyd about looking at my son's case. I've already had that conversation. Um, However, the wonderful lady is getting ready to, let me make sure I say this right, shift to the next phase of her divine journey. We're not going to say the R word anymore. She's just shifting to the next phase of her divine calling. So she did refer me to someone else that I could speak with. But I know that you all did not think I was going to have a contact with this woman and not tell her my story if I'm telling total strangers on the street. You know I was going to tell her. All right, Aaliyah, y'all pray for me because you know I got some issues. Pray for me. Okay, Aaliyah.
I just have one question still on this topic, which is a perfect segue regarding how you believe community-based organizations and churches can move and become engines of systemic transformation for returning citizens?
So I think
Wow.
that that's a good question. I think that we do that in several ways. First, I think that we have to make sure that we are creating environments where our own members and parishioners can feel comfortable sharing without the stigma being attached. I think we also need to create environments where when a person returns to the community, they also feel welcome, if that means coming into the church walls. But I believe that, again, I was my father was a Baptist preacher, so I was raised in the church. It is our mission to get outside of the four walls of the church. Ministry
Mm,
doesn't
hmm.
always just happen on a Sunday morning from 11 to 1.
It's
Ministry
community.
is going out in the community. It is community. And so I believe that we have to um, recognize that, and we need to build upon that. Um, when we talk about restorative justice,
Mm,
our communities need to be in places where, if they're having discussions about what should the penalty be for such an offense, what should happen when people commit such an offense, whatever the offense is, if those offenses are being impacted on our communities, we should say in what the penalty should be. We shouldn't allow
mm.
others
Outsiders.
from
Hmm.
other communities to determine what our way of dealing with offenses to our community should be. There are many
Mm,
cultures from around the world where the community is involved in deciding how an offense is going to be addressed. If you have offended me as an individual, I should have some say in what the penalty should be. And it shouldn't always just be about retribution. I should have some say in whether you are required to go through some healing process, required to address your trauma that you have not dealt with for years. And you
mm.
would just be amazed, like the stories that we tell in the courtroom. Again, we're telling these stories on behalf of our clients for the first time. Much of it involves trauma, generational trauma
Yes.
that starts
Yep.
when
Yes.
they were very, very, very young. Um, and the other thing that's really important is when you think about the money, right? So even if you're not passionate about the individuals and you don't have a connection to anybody in prison, just think about how much we're spending on incarcerating individuals and
Talk about it,
how much
Professor.
of that money, if we had spent it on the front end before that individual or that family was in crises, how much of that money could we have better spent on the front end? Why do we wait
Hmm.
until something magnificent happens before we decide to spend money in places where it's needed? Why do I have to end up in foster care for you to recognize that my family is unstable?
Mm,
So
Yes.
those are the
Yes.
things that when we talk about communities being involved, those are the things that we need to be having conversations about. And I love to talk to church folks. You know, I do spend time talking with church folks about different pieces of legislation, but I love talking to church folks because, again, um, we need to recognize that um, we're all spiritual, humane beings, And we cannot forget the humanity of every person that's on this earth, whether they are behind bars or whether they are sitting beside us in a classroom. We have to recognize the humanity in every person. Angela Davis says, prisons don't hide society's problems. They hide
Mm-hmm.
human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Prisons hide human
Mm-hmm.
beings. Yeah.
We are all made in God's image, and He loves all of the that are behind bars. And
Yes.
we have a right to have it is our responsibility to stand up for them, put it that way. And I agree with you. We lack humanity, and this is why policies really they they portray our lack of humanity. They
Yeah.
basically outline with the way that we treat each other. And I think
Yeah.
honestly, Christians, it is based in religion. When you talk about the yeast of the Pharisees, where we judge, we want to judge as opposed to help. We want to
Mm-hmm.
point as opposed to help. And this is where, how are we solution, instead of being a part of the problem? We're supposed to be advocating for these souls, and bringing them
Yeah.
back into the fold. So I agree with you that a lived experience where someone gets to judge your actions, where they have not had to live your life, they have no idea what you have had to endure, and no one cares about the trauma, you're not going
Yeah.
to get anything else from that person because no one is giving anything to them.
Yeah.
This is where that disconnect really happens, where if you look at someone as an individual opposed to a bed or as opposed to a number, you can better
Yeah.
understand policy can help to breathe hope into them, where they can add value because they are valuable
Yes.
within society. So how do that overall connection? So I
Yeah.
think that is definitely key. And just one last question that I have with I'm working with Jay Messina on a Project Redemption initiative, and you believe are some of the foundational components, maybe two or three foundational components you believe that would ensure sustainability and dignity for those that we are seeking to serve?
Huh. That's a good question. Let me think about that. Let me think about that. But while I'm thinking, um, I would like to just remind the listeners that the prison industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right?
Correct.
So it's not just the money that we're spending to house the individuals, but think about all of the systems and all of the players that are involved in making a profit from our people being in prison.
Correct.
Prison phone
Correct.
calls, prison visits. You put a quarter in the lockers every time you go. Um, any way that you want to try to stay connected to your loved one, whether it's writing letters or sending packages in the mail, spending money for commissary, right? So think about
Mm-hmm.
all of the industries that are profiting from the number of people that we have in prison. Um, I shared a
Mm-hmm.
video with my students the other day, and it was from a sheriff in some town. And the slogan from the town was, "Is we is or is we isn't going to get ourselves a prison?" And they were using this slogan to try to attract the building of prisons in this town where there was nothing there, but they knew that if they built a prison and opened it, that people would come, that other states would pay to have their prisoners housed at this facility. And so they actually made a commercial, and that was their slogan, to try to attract people to come to this prison. So let's I just wanted to put that out there to remind folks that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So it's not
The
just,
sad part is that that's
That's
not
right,
shocking.
Professor Boyd.
yeah, so it's not just
And I
dehumanization.
say, I've been saying
Yeah,
that, yeah. Because that's why I say to people who say, well, this really doesn't affect me because I don't even have any family members in prison. I don't even know anybody in prison. Well, you probably do, but you might not know they're in prison. But your tax money is paying for those of us that do
yeah,
have people in there. And like my son broke it down to me. He said, Mom, from the police officer that arrests you to the detective that investigates your
yeah,
case, to the prosecutor who prosecutes you, to the public defender that the state pays
yes,
for, to the judge, every one of those people are making money off of you being in the
yeah,
system.
yeah,
So it's amazing to me, and again, got to take a deep breath. It's amazing to me when people say this doesn't affect me. It has nothing to do with me. It affects all of us, and that's why I get so aggravated and so annoyed when our officials say stuff like, "Well, it's a crisis. Yes, our prisons are overrun. Yes, but then." There's still so many thousands of people in there that should be home.
yeah,
So why are they still sitting in
yeah,
there? That's the question.
yeah. Yeah, what is the return value that you're getting? Like diminishing returns. You get to the point of diminishing returns at some point, right? You're not going to get anything else out of this
Yes,
person. What else are you going to get out
Hmm.
of a
that's
73-year
right.
old or this 82-year-old woman at MCIW? What else are you going to get out of her? She has dementia. She
That's right.
doesn't even know where she is on most days. What else are you going to get out of her?
Wow.
Like at some point, yes. Yeah. Um, so to go back to your
Wow.
question about just thinking about the concepts and sustainability, I think that one important factor is, so I would just state that I am an abolitionist. I believe that we should abolish prisons and the whole prison concept and come up with another way to address offenses against our community. But as long as we are going to imprison people until we get to that point, um, we have to invest in education. We have to invest in education before a person is incarcerated. The experts say that a child who can't read by the third grade is more likely to end up in prison than one who is able to read. And once a person is in prison, we have to
Hmm.
invest in education. Again, there's no reason why my client who served 30 years should come out without a GED. And so we have to, if we talk about sustainability and identifying what is important for reentry, education is critical. And it doesn't have to be formal education, right? There are vocational trades that an individual can take, but they have to be trades that will actually lead to a marketable skill. We need to be
Hmm.
teaching computer technology, right? Like, who doesn't need that these days? Um, so yes, educate and education is the one thing that is so powerful that nobody can take away from you, right? They can take away your clothing, they can take away your
We
name and
also
give
know
you a
that
number. They
mhm.
can now, yeah, yeah, they
We
cannot
know that
take
that's
away
also
your
a separate
education. Education
ploy.
is power.
Yeah, and we understand that that's a separate
Yes,
ploy with the fact that if you're not educated, you have no voice, you have no rights. So that's something else that is being taken away from you, with, going into prison at a very early age. And you don't have all of these resources and you can't be marketable. There's really
right.
nothing that you can have in terms of value for your life. So you cannot translate that value to your community because you're not being given the opportunity to create or develop that value yourself. So
Yes,
definitely
absolutely.
agree.
Absolutely. And even in the academic setting that I find myself in now, teaching at the law school, I make sure that I incorporate into my syllabus things that the students are not going to learn elsewhere. They won't learn about trauma informed lawyering, how
Mm,
to represent people who come from histories of trauma.
mm,
They won't learn about um, legal ethics, like what is your obligation to your client centered representation. They don't always
mhm,
teach that. um, Community based lawyering, the movement lawyering that I talked about, like you're not going to learn that in most law school settings, but I incorporate those things into my syllabus. Cross cultural lawyering, right? How do I represent someone
mhm,
that doesn't look like me? Most of my
mhm,
students are not of African American descent. How do they represent? How do they gain the trust of a person who doesn't come from privilege? And I've had my challenges, right, in
mhm.
teaching that. I've had students who, most students get it. I've had some who just don't get it. But that's important. That's important for them to know before they go out into the world and represent folks, whether they're going to be working in white collar firm representation or elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think collaboration has also been missing because most lawyers, in the fact that you're weaving that into, your curriculum, most
Hmm.
lawyers don't understand with collaborating with maybe a nonprofit, a domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking organization. You can see the trauma and you know how to
Yeah,
provide them with those wraparound services while you're also representing them. Because
yeah,
if you want them to be in a good state for ensuring that if a trial is coming up, they can see the things that they're dealing with. They understand the process that they're going through. They have more clarity
yeah,
because trauma in parallel. All of those things really need to heal the person as a whole. They're not going to be healed enough to go
yeah,
into reentry and actually be successful once they're released.
yeah, yeah. And so that's why I do collaborate with social workers. I have a social worker who comes into my class, and she talks to the students about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and she talks about the
Mm,
trauma. She talks about the trauma that we see in our clients and vicarious trauma, right? Like if you're a person who is doing this work, you could be impacted by vicarious trauma. Um, when I
mhm.
teach the class on mitigation, like how do you sit in the courtroom and have someone talk about all of the things that have happened in your life? Well, who better to teach that class with me? I bring in former clients who have had to do just that, and they co-teach that class with me.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yes, it
That
is
lived
about
experience is
Wow,
collaboration.
so key. Mhm.
Yes.
I love that. And I'm gonna I'm gonna say this, and then I'm gonna be finished talking. Let Aaliyah close us out because I'm getting more and more issues over here in my throat. But I am in the process of writing an autobiography um, about a mother called A Mother's Cry, and about a journey of a mother who has been dealing with an incarcerated child. And as you both of you were just talking a few minutes ago, I was thinking about, I was writing a certain part of this manuscript, and it hit me one day. about the trauma of my son's father dying when he was 10 months old. So he never had that father in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And people have said to me, well, you
Mm.
can't really miss what you never had. And I said, that's not true because we were designed to have these pieces. We were created to
Yes.
have these pieces. And so when these pieces are missing, it has an impact, even if we don't know how to verbalize it. And so then when he started going to school, talking about how the school system failed him, because in early childhood, he exhibited depression, anger, all of these things were going back to the trauma
Mm-hmm.
of not having his father in his life. So instead of the school system offering him any kind of assistance, whether it was mental or whatever, they just labeled him
Mm-hmm.
as a problem child. That he's going to be trouble no matter
Mm-hmm.
what. It's so obvious that this is what was happening that years later, when my youngest son attended the same school, one of the teachers said to him one day out of the blue, I just found out who your older brother is. So I'm really not expecting much from you this year.
Wow.
So if a educator, a person of authority, says something to you like that, how can it not
Yeah.
impact your mental
Yeah.
state from that point on? So I just wanted to drop that in there because as you were just talking about the trauma and what have you, it's easy to just like look at people and, as Aaliyah said earlier, judge them, write them off. And this is what I say about the ridiculous sentence that my son received. When you look at a 25-year-old and you give them a 50-year sentence, what you're saying to them is you're
Yeah.
useless and we really don't want anything else to do with you in society, so we're writing you off.
Yeah.
How does a person walk through life knowing that somebody feels that way about
Yeah.
them? So I just wanted to bring that in there, and then I'm gonna let Miss Williamson bring this plane in for a landing.
Thank you. And I hope everyone can hear me. And Miss Moy, thank you for your presence here and all the work that you have been doing so tirelessly. I'm so happy to hear that you're not, seeking to close out all of the work that you've been doing and really continuing to walk in God's purpose for your life. Um, and just really the work that you have been doing really shows how we all need to really focus on not only purpose, but being purposeful in all the things that we do and ensuring
Mm-hmm.
that, we're truly understanding the plight of others. And even if we don't have lived experience, understanding that it could be us, it could be
Yeah.
someone that we love, and knowing that if the system is broken now and broken for those who it is currently holding hostage, it will be broken for our children
Yeah.
and for our families going forward. And your work really reminds us tree is a kingdom calling, not just a policy issue. And just for biblical purposes, Micah 6:8 and Hebrews 13, justice, mercy, and remembering they and created
Yes.
as if we were
Yes.
with them. And Project Redemption is a
Yes.
ministry, a response to God's
Mm-hmm.
command to restore and redeem. And real change begins when we build systems that reflect justice, not just man's punishment. And I just truly want to thank you for walking in obedience and helping to show others how to rebuild what's been broken. And really teaching people that, you know, these people are not numbers, they're not beds, they're not a transaction. They are individuals who have people who love them, who rely on them. And breaking that family dynamic is just so detrimental to so many children. And we need to do better. And although I understand that, and we talked about this, advocacy can be an exhausting process.
Mm-hmm.
I think with all of us on the front lines, we can tap out when we need that break, but to keep the momentum going, because as you stated, with that ivory tower, we have a big God and he can break down whatever barriers that are in our way. And I know little by little we'll continue to chip at this and into the fact that everyone can be profitable in a way where our entire communities are profitable and everyone can be safe and be in community with one another. I think people look at money as this way of you have to tear somebody down in order to make it. And that's not the kingdom. That's not God. And this is where we
Yeah.
truly need to understand that we can all survive, but we need each other to do that. And we need to look at each other through a different lens. And again, your work has just truly been a testament to that. So I thank you for continuing on with that.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. Thank you so much for having me. One of the most rewarding aspects of this work is, yes, walking someone out of prison who has been in prison for decades. But the best part of this work is giving people hope. And that's the hope that transcends even the transition, right? So you would just be amazed if you were, I am all still amazed when I collaborate with and work in communities with people who have spent decades in prison, who come out and want to help others and remember those who they left behind and go back in and be volunteers and be advocates in the community for the youth. I am just always amazed because I know I would probably be the angry Black woman if I had gone through what some of them have gone through. But I am just always amazed by the way that they come out and are so grateful and so humble and so dedicated to continuing to do the work. And so with everything that I do, I honor each and every one of them. I too many of them to name, but I honor each and every one of them.
They a lot,
That's awesome.
honestly.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Moy, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. You really have given us a lot to think about as we're moving forward with Project Redemption Initiative. We're going to be reaching out to
Okay.
you. Um, so don't pretend you don't see me calling you when I call your phone, okay?
Project Redemption, you said, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My
Somebody told me I should have been a stand-up comedian because I'm always thinking of something crazy to say.
my
But
dad
I
wrote
just
about
am so
redemption
blessed
in
to have
Black theology. That was his thing. He talked about liberation theology and the whole history of redemption in Black theology. That's what he wrote about.
Oh
So
wow, I'd love to read
yes,
that.
okay. I will send you the title of some of
I'm
his work.
serious.
Please,
Yeah,
Send
please,
it
I
to
would
yeah.
love
me.
that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
would.
Okay, okay.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Well, this is the year of Jubilee.
Thank you so
So
much for
Yes,
we're
it
having
is.
me.
we're just yeah, thank you. You have a great rest of the evening. Thank you for taking time to be with us. And we'll talk with you again soon.
Okay,
We had some comments in the comment section, but we didn't have any questions.
okay.
So,
All right. Thank you.
all right, everybody. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Thank you,
Thank you.
Aaliyah.
Have
Once again, you
a good
came through for
evening.
me, girl.
No problem.
Bye bye.
No, great evening.
All right. Good night. Bye bye.
Bye.
You do the
Bye.
same.